race that Terry Labonte led more than 6 laps, September 1984. He's out in front now on the white flag lap here in the 2003 Southern 500.
August 31st, 2003, the 54th Southern 500. Nothing unfamiliar of any of the previous 53, but as Terry Labonte led the field near the finish, an unsettling truth loomed over the egg-shaped oval. For 2004, the schedule had moved the classic Southern 500 mile race to later in the year, off of its original Labor Day date. But how do we have this race today? Why was the date moved? And how do we get it back? This is the rise and fall, and then rebirth, of the Southern 500.
Jimmie Johnson off of turn number 2, the final lap of the final Southern 500 at Darlington. Can he score the victory and close out this racetrack's great history with his name on the winner's trophy and put the exclamation point on a bid for the championship heading to Miami next Sunday? It'll be Jimmie Johnson as the winner of the 55th Mountain Dew Southern 500.
The roots of the hardest 500 mile race starts with a man by the name of Harold Brassington, a former racer himself, who post-World War II retired from driving to work with his personal businesses. During 1948, he toured up north from his home in South Carolina to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There, in front of a crowd of 200,000, Maury Rose would win and give Harold an idea. He knew of the deep racing routes in the South and thought if he had a place like Indy, he could pull off what they did in South Carolina. He came back home and found 70 acres of land for sale by a local farmer named Sherman Ramsey. What used to be land that produced cotton and peanuts now is about to lay host to the second ever 500 mile race outside of Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Construction of the track began and became somewhat haphazardly. The track was supposed to be symmetric, but the turn 4 exit was tapered out too quickly and had to be readjusted. It created a non-uniform exit that makes it feel like the wall's coming out to grab you when you exited it. And turns 1 and 2 were narrowed up due to an agreement in the property purchase that called for the non-disturbance of Ramsey's minnow pond. The corners were sharpened up to still fit the track into the area, and for the first time in superspeedway history, the track was completely paved in asphalt. Yes, even at this time, Indy still had a front stretch full of bricks, and the entire track was not paved. Therefore, Darlington was the first superspeedway in asphalt. Similar to Indy as well, the corners almost had 0 degrees of banking, and the track was made incredibly wide. It would run flat all the way till about 10 to 20 feet away from the wall, where steep banking was added as an attempt to slow the cars before impact. As construction finished, it was time for a date selection. Labor Day 1950, just like how Indy does at Memorial Day. The first Southern 500. Bill France would bring his own NASCAR Strictly Stock division, and Brassington, to France's dismay, talked to the CSRA, or the Central States Racing Association, into bringing their top series in as well. In turn, 81 cars showed up to the race, with all cars doing qualifying just like how Indy did. 4 laps around the track with the highest average speed across all of them. For nearly half the month of August, half the cars sprinted around the flat 1.25 mile track. Many local fans were welcome to take their family commuter around the track to try and qualify in the race. And in the end, 75 cars officially made up the grid. And then Harold requested, just like Indy, instead of 11 rows of 3, they made 25 rows of 3 to start the field. Grand Marshal for the race would be then Governor Strom Thurgood, a man who served until 2003 on the Senate. Pole sitter Curtis Turner led the field to green, but wouldn't lead the opening lap as Gober Sosaby would take the honor. Turner would eventually get the lead, but be taken on lap 275. And then a driver by the name of Johnny Mance took the lead. While it was only Mance's 3rd Cup start, he did have a plethora of racing experience. He was a winner of the classic Milwaukee race that ran in the AAA Open Wheel Series, and through his reputation built in that series, he was able to acquire a deal with Firestone to test a new tire compound designed specifically for asphalt racing. It was debuted in this race, and while most others were running dirt tires causing extreme wear, a common legend was built in this. That Mance ran truck tires, which is true to an extent. The compound was based on truck tires, but it actually wasn't exact truck tires. What is true about this race is that Mance won by 9 laps that day, as some went through as many as 15 sets of tires to the finish. Teams became so desperate to find new tires that crewmen began breaking into the parking lot and stealing tires off of people's cars just to make it home. Mance, even though he dominated, it was not at a blistering pace, taking over 6.5 hours to finish the race, an average speed of about 80 miles an hour. Over the following years, the track became more iconic, being called the Lady in Black, the track too tough to tame, and then it was given a second date by the Cup Series. They titled that race as the Rebel 500, and became the spirit of Southern pride. Ironically, a certain flag that is now banned in NASCAR was actually waved at the start of the race instead of the green flag. Over the time, many of the traditions got phased out. Instead of doing the 4-lap average qualifying time like Indy, it was brought to the standard like every other race. So were the 3 wide starts, which would stop after 1961. Another thing that evolved was how the track was raced. Many began realizing that you could run up on the banked area and started flying around the track. Darlington realized the change and repaved the surface. It was a spectacle to watch cars go right up against that wall and carry as much speed as possible. Teams would go as far as putting plywood on the side of the cars to ride the wall, but not damage the fenders. The track regradients the inside to have more of a smoother transition, and by the end of the 60s, the track has never been changed since, only barely adjusting the apron banking. You technically today could still run all the way down on the bottom, that is a racing groove, but obviously the top is where it's at. Victory at the track became a ticket to immortality in a sense. People like Yarborough, Pearson, Baker, Allison, and Earnhardt all won at the track. And underdogs even like Nelson Stacy, Jim Reed, and Larry Frank also won there. But nobody won the races quite like Jeff Gordon did in the late 90s. During that time, Jeff would win 4 years in a row, a mark that hasn't even been approached before or since. Up till 2003, the race only ever saw 12 multi-time winners, and only 8 of them won 3 or more times, and only 3 of them won 4 more times. The 2 that had 5 wins were Cale Yarborough and Jeff Gordon, and of the 12 multi-time winners in general, 11 of them are in the Hall of Fame already, with the only one not being Harry Gant, who's been a nominee for years. But after 2003, an issue arose with the race. NASCAR was growing at a rate that far exceeded its southern roots. Much like North Wilkesboro years prior, Darlington was put on the chopping block. Talks of sale and even demolition began hovering over the track, as ticket sales slouched compared to the Titans of the West. The track did try to grow, with in 1997 actually flipping the straightaways to build more front stretch seating. What is now the backstretch has the highway run extremely close to it, preventing wide-scale projects. With it on what is now the actual front stretch, the track was able to grow its grandstands free, without affecting how the track drove either. However, what was a near-death blow for Darlington and the Southern 500 was in 2004, when a lawsuit filed against NASCAR by Speedway Motorsports Inc., another company that owned Cup tracks, claimed that it was not given its guaranteed second Cup date for its Texas Motor Speedway. Immediately, Darlington didn't lose its second date. What it did lose was its Labor Day weekend for 2004. Instead, it was now given to Auto Club Speedway in California, and the Southern 500 would be run in November. It was during the 2004 chase, the inaugural one, and the race was officially touted as the last Southern 500. The situation got worse though. As for 2005, it was announced that the spring date was given to Phoenix, and that the November date had now gone to Texas. There was a very short period of time where people believed that Darlington had no confirmed dates, and that it was gone. That was until they gave Rockingham its spring date. Rockingham was the track that met its maker, but Darlington was shoehorned in on Mother's Day weekend, a singular 500-mile race in the middle of the early part of the season. They didn't even call it the Southern 500. As for 2005, the race was called the Dodge Charger 500. There was no branding of the Southern 500, but still carried the spirit of it to an extent. Greg Biffle won the race, and for 2006 it was the same. Biffle won again, but it still wasn't called the Southern 500. As another way to keep the track, they installed lights at the speedway, which allowed them to put the 500-mile race as a day to night shift, changing how the cars handle through the night and escalating the challenge. It created a new spectacle for the event. And in 2007, Jeff Gordon would win again, breaking the all-time record he had with Cale Yarborough for 6 Southern 500s. But again, not many expressed interest in the accomplishment. For 2008, the track got a $10 million investment and updated the facility and repaved the old surface. For 2009, Atlanta took the Auto Club Labor Day date, but Darlington returned to being called the Southern 500 finally. Over the next few years, appreciation grew of the track, too tough to tame, and eventually, an announcement was made for 2015. The Labor Day date was moved back to the Southern 500. What was first a modest announcement blew up in excitement. Many teams and drivers spawned the throwback weekend off of it, bringing many throwback schemes. NBC brought back Ken Squire and Ned Jarrett to call part of the race, and fans brought old cars, shirts, and hats, dotting the grandstands with them. It was an all-out celebration of what the Southern 500 used to be, and a rebirth of a race that used to be, and now once again was, a crown jewel of the sport. As time has gone on over the last 8 years, the Southern 500 has climbed back to being one of the most important races in the Cup schedule. It still is one of the hardest races to win, and if you can do it, you are in the respect of all fellow competitors. It's even got 2 dates again, and is now the Cup Series playoff opener. It has spawned the throwback tradition that we now see in the spring race, and while I think it still should be the Southern 500 that has a throwback race, it is fantastic to see what the Southern 500 is again. To see the idea that Harold Brassington wanted and still be achieved nearly 75 years later. Every year, fans gather to come and appreciate the track, and even though we came so close to losing it, we still have the Southern 500.